The last thing Mara Voss remembered about her husband before left for the Kessler 9 deep survey mission was the weight of his hands. Not his face. She'd looked at his face 1,000 times in the 2 years since. She'd memorized every line of it from photographs, from the official NASA portrait framed above the fireplace, from the shaky home video she sometimes played at 2 in the morning when the house was too quiet, and the walls felt like they were leaning in. But his hands she could not reconstruct from images. They were a physical memory, the kind your body holds separate from your mind. The breadth of them on her shoulders, the roughness of his knuckles, the way he'd pressed a set of dog tags into her palm the morning he shipped out, not his own, but a battered pair that had belonged to his grandfather, the old infantryman who'd survived Chosin. He'd folded her fingers over the metal and said, "Hold these until I get back, that's an order." She'd laughed. She always laughed when he gave orders, because Declan Voss was the least authoritative man she'd ever loved. The kind of person who apologized to furniture he bumped into and cried at wildlife documentaries, and could not for the life of him keep a houseplant alive. He was a systems engineer who'd somehow talked his way onto an astronaut crew because he understood alien signal mathematics the way other people understood breathing, automatically, without effort, without knowing exactly how he did it. NASA had wanted his brain. He'd given them everything else too. The mission was supposed to last 14 months. He came back in 11. The broadcast cut-ins at 3:17 on a Tuesday afternoon, interrupting a weather update. Mara was in the kitchen, making a sandwich she didn't want, watching the muted television out of habit. She saw the NASA seal appear on screen before she heard anything, and she dropped the knife. The spokesperson, a woman she didn't recognize, jaw tight, words careful, told the world that the Kessler 9 mission had achieved early return due to, quote, a navigational correction that brought the vessel within efficient trajectory of re-entry. The crew was healthy. The mission had been a success. There had been one period of communications disruption, lasting approximately 90 seconds, attributed to a solar weather event. 90 seconds. Mara stood in the kitchen with her hands very still on the countertop and thought about 90 seconds. She thought about all the things that could happen in 90 seconds. She thought about the way the spokesperson had moved her mouth around the word disruption, with the particular care of someone navigating a minefield. Each syllable placed exactly. No weight shifted wrong. She called the base. She was transferred 3 times. She was told Declan was being held for standard post-mission medical observation and would be in contact shortly. He called 4 hours later. His voice was right. That was the first thing she checked. She listened like a tuning fork, like a woman who had spent 2 years waiting to hear a specific frequency of a specific human voice. And it was right. It was him. He said her name the way he always said it, with the same slight roughness at the start. Mara, not quite Mar, and she exhaled so hard she had to grip the counter again. But then, "How's the garden?" he asked. Mara didn't have a garden. She had never had a garden. She had mentioned once, 9 months before his departure, that she thought it might be nice to plant tomatoes. They had never planted tomatoes. "Fine," she said carefully. "It's fine, Deck. The tomatoes are doing great." A pause, fractionally too long. "Good," he said, "that's really good." She told no one for 3 days. They let her see him on the 4th day, in a room that was technically a rec room, but had been emptied of everything except 2 chairs and a folding table with a water pitcher on it. Declan was already seated when she came in. He stood when she entered, which he always did, and she crossed the room and put her arms around him and pressed her face against his neck and breathed him in. He smelled like himself. Soap and something faintly metallic, the smell she'd always associated with long hours in machine rooms. He held her, and his arms were the right weight and the right strength. And she stood there longer than she meant to, because she didn't want to pull back and look at his face. When she did, his eyes were a shade she couldn't name, not different enough to be alarming. Different enough to be a word she couldn't find. "You look tired," she said, because it was true and because she needed to say something. "Long trip home," he said, and smiled, and the smile was correct. Every measurement of it was correct. She was an engineer's wife, and she had measured it. She sat down across from him and put her hands flat on the table, palms down. After a moment, she pushed the dog tags across the surface toward him. He looked at them. He didn't touch them. "Aren't you going to take them back?" she asked. He looked up. "Of course." He picked them up and turned them over once in his hands and set them down again beside the water pitcher. Not around his neck, beside the pitcher. Declan had been wearing his grandfather's dog tags since before she'd met him. He'd worn them through grad school and 3 agency postings, and a broken collarbone from a cycling accident, and every day of their marriage. He had never in any context, in any memory she held, put them down beside a water pitcher. She sighed slowly. She said she was glad he was home. She meant it. She was glad someone was home. She just needed to find out what had happened to her husband in those 90 seconds. The base had a perimeter. Everything important had a perimeter. Mara spent the next 9 days mapping it. She was not a soldier. She had a degree in environmental engineering, a runner's body, and a stubborn streak her mother had described as catastrophic, and her husband had described as, "my favorite thing about you." She had also spent 2 years alone, which does something to a person. Strips certain hesitations away, wears down the part of you that waits for permission. She'd learned to fix the plumbing herself. She'd learned to file taxes for an absent spouse. She'd learned to sleep lightly and wake completely, the way animals do when something shifts in the dark. She started with what she could verify. She drove past the perimeter gates at different times. She noted the shift rotations, the camera coverage gaps, the one section of the north fence, where a construction crew had been working for 6 days, and where, consequently, 2 of the 3 standard cameras were angled wrong. She called Declan's crewmates. 2 of them didn't answer. One of them, a woman named Parrish who'd done EVA work with Declan on the earlier Kessler 7 mission, picked up on the second ring and immediately said, "Don't ask me about the 90 seconds. "I wasn't going to," Mara said. A long silence. "Were you?" Mara asked. "I'm not allowed to say anything about the 90 seconds. Parrish. I'm telling you right now, in the clearest possible terms, that I am not able to discuss any events that occurred during a 90-second communications blackout on March 4th. And I would like you to know that I am saying this while making direct eye contact with a picture of my children." Mara sat with that for a moment. "Is he okay?" Another silence. Longer this time. "I think," Parrish said carefully, "that whatever Ryan is now, it is very interested in being here. It is not hostile. But I don't think he's in charge anymore." Mara wrote that down. She wrote down everything. She had 3 notebooks by the end of the first week, cross-indexed, with a folded map of the base tucked inside the back cover of the third one. Her friend Lena, who brought over dinner twice a week and didn't ask unnecessary questions, and had a brother-in-law who'd done 3 tours and came home changed in the particular way. Soldiers come home changed, sat across from her one evening and watched Mara annotate the map and said, "What are you going to do when you find him?" "Talk to him," Mara said. "And if talking doesn't work," Mara looked up, "then I'll do whatever comes next." Lena nodded. She passed the salt without being asked. She was, Mara thought, the best kind of friend, the kind who doesn't tell you to be reasonable. The thing inside Declan Voss had been watching. This is what it understood. The planet was loud. Spectacularly, exhaustingly loud, not in terms of sound it could parse, but in terms of signal. The species broadcast constantly. It broadcast emotion. It broadcast intent. It broadcast memory. The thing had skimmed the surface of 34 other species in its long passage through the local arm of the galaxy, and none of them had done anything like this. Most species were coherent, most species maintained. This one leaked, it overflowed. It could not seem to stop transmitting, even when transmitting served no tactical purpose, even when it was counterproductive. The man whose body it inhabited leaked worst of all. It had chosen him in the 90 seconds not because he was strongest or most intellectually capable. There had been others on the vessel that were both, but because of the mathematics. He understood the signal. He had built his life around the attempt to understand it. And in those 90 seconds when the black spout swallowed the ship, and the thing slid through the hull, like water through gauze, he had been the one who looked up from his console and simply waited, not panicking, not running, just waiting, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent his whole life believing contact was possible, and is finally, despite everything, unsurprised to find that it is. The thing had not expected to feel that. It had not expected, seated in the body of Declan Voss, holding Declan Voss's memories like a stack of warm stones, to feel the specific weight of a set of dog tags in a hand. It had not expected to feel the memory of a woman laughing, or the image of 2 tomato plants that had never been planted, or the particular shape of a dream held between 2 people, to fly, and you, as though these were not information but something else entirely. Something without a category in its taxonomy. It put the dog tags beside the water pitcher because it did not know. Yet what they meant, why they mattered so much, why the memory of them pressed from the inside, like something trying to surface. It was still figuring that out when the perimeter alarm went off at 2:09 on a Thursday morning. Mara made it 40 yards inside the fence before the light hit her. She dropped flat and stayed there, face against the wet grass, counting seconds. The light swept. It swept again. She was in the shadow of the construction equipment, behind the cover of a scaffolding frame, and the camera angles were exactly where she'd estimated they'd be. The light moved on. She kept going. She'd gone over it enough times that it was less like thinking and more like memory. Left at the maintenance building, past the generator units, along the wall of the secondary hangar, through the service door with the code she'd gotten from a facilities worker whose wife went to the same yoga class and who had been, after 2 years of nodding acquaintance, genuinely glad to help. When she'd explained she'd locked herself out of the subsystem admin panel, people helped. That was one of the things about humans that the threat assessments never accounted for. People just kept helping each other. She found Declan in a room she hadn't known about, which meant her map was wrong, which meant she'd gotten in on instinct, and that was fine. She'd recalibrate. The room was smaller than she expected, white and spare, and he was sitting on a cot with his wrists resting on his knees and his eyes on the door when she came through it. Like he'd heard her coming, like he'd known. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She pulled the folding chair from beside the door and sat down across from him. She'd planned a lot of opening lines. She'd thrown all of them out somewhere around the generator units. "Are you in there?" she asked. A pause, not fractionally long this time, much longer. Something moved behind his eyes. She watched it the way she'd once watched clouds move across the face of a mountain, a thing that had nothing to do with her but that she was witnessing anyway. "Partially," he said, and the voice was wrong in a way she couldn't put her finger on, like a word pronounced correctly by someone who had only ever read it. "Which part is deck?" Another long pause. His jaw worked. He looked down at his hands. "The part that knows the dog tags were wrong," he said. "He is very loud about the dog tags." Mara let out a slow breath. "Yeah, he would be." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "So who's the other part?" It looked at her with Declan's eyes. "I do not have a word you would recognize. Where do you come from?" "Very far." "What do you want?" It considered that for a long time. She waited. She'd learned to wait. "I wanted to understand," it said finally. "Your species transmits constantly. I could hear you from the outer system. I wanted to know what the signal meant." "And I have been here for 11 days, it said, wearing a man who loves you. And I think the signal is." It stopped. Its brow creased. Declan's brow, creasing in a way that was fully Declan, the exact expression he made when he was trying to find the precise word for something. "The signal is the point. Not the information. The signal itself. The transmission. The fact that you all keep reaching toward each other even when it accomplishes nothing." Mara was quiet for a moment. "That's what you came all the way out here to figure out?" she asked. "Yes. Couldn't you have just asked?" Something happened in the face that she thought might be the closest thing it had to surprise. "I didn't think you would." It stopped again. "Your species does not typically." "We're very weird," she agreed. "I know. But we do tend to answer questions when someone asks them nicely." She leaned back. "What's it like?" "In there with him?" It was quiet for so long she thought it might not answer. Then, "Loud," it said. "He is very loud. He keeps." Again the jaw worked, like it was rummaging through Declan's vocabulary for something close enough. "He keeps thinking about the tomatoes," Mara laughed. She hadn't expected to laugh and she couldn't stop it, and it came out a little ragged, the way laughing does when it comes from somewhere near crying. "Yeah," she said. "That sounds right." "You never planted them," it said. "No. He is very sorry about that." She pressed her lips together. "He can be sorry to my face when I get him back." It looked at her steadily. "You came here to negotiate. I came here to get my husband. These are the same thing." "Yes," she said, "they are." They sat across from each other for 3 hours. She talked. She told it things it asked. About the dog tags, about Declan's grandfather, about the battle at Chosin Reservoir, and what it meant to survive something unsurvivable, and what a piece of worn metal could hold. She talked about signal theory the way Dec had explained it to her over dinner 6 years ago, the idea that the first thing any intelligence sends into the void is not information but presence. "I am here, not what I am, just that I am." She told it about Lena, and the notebooks and the map, and the construction crew, with the badly aimed cameras, and watched it listen with Declan's face doing something that wasn't quite Declan's usual listening expression, but was close enough that it hurt in a specific way she couldn't describe. It told her things in return, halting, working to translate. It told her that it had moved through 34 species and found intelligences that were vast, cold, and efficient, that had solved the problem of existence by removing the variables. No attachment, no loss, no signal between individuals that couldn't be precisely decoded and accounted for. It told her that these species endured, that they were stable, that they continued. But, she said, it said, I have spent 11 days in a man who can feel the weight of a set of dog tags in someone else's hand, and I do not know what to do with that. She looked at it for a long time. I want my husband back, she said. I think you know that. And I think you know that I'm not leaving without him. And I think that if you needed me to be easy to deal with, you wouldn't have looked up when I came through the door. It looked at her. I also think, she said quietly, that maybe whatever you are, you've been alone in space for a very long time. And I think you heard our signal, and you came, and I'm not going to be unkind about that. But you can't just take someone. You understand that, right? You can't just take a person without asking. The face went very still. He said yes, it told her. In the 90 seconds. He looked up, and he waited, and there was a moment. He was not certain what was happening, but he chose to wait rather than run. That was consent. That's not consent, she said. That's wonder. We're full of wonder. It's one of our worst qualities. She leaned forward. Consent is, I want to carry you. Consent is, for how long, and what do you need, and what do I get in return? Consent is a conversation. Silence. We are having that conversation now, it said. Yes, she said, we are. What she offered was this. She knew people. She was an environmental engineer who knew systems people and science people, and a woman from her yoga class whose husband had worked facilities at a government research station for 11 years, and who was, it turned out, also very helpful. She could get it access, not to a body. She would not negotiate that. She said this clearly and did not soften it, but to signal, to bandwidth, to the full, spectacular, leaking torrent of human communication, properly routed with proper permissions, every transmission, every frequency, everything humanity had ever sent into the void. There are archives, she said, 70 years of radio transmission, literature, music, recorded conversations, mathematics. We've been broadcasting ourselves into space since before I was born. That's all yours. That's not nothing. It listened. But my husband comes with me when I leave this room, she said. That's not negotiable, and if he does not want to, ask him, she said. Declan's face went distant the way it sometimes did when he was deep in calculation. She watched his eyes. She watched them move, and then she watched something shift, an interiority returning, a weight settling back behind the features. And then it was him. Undeniably, irrevocably him. His eyes found her face and filled up with something she recognized from every difficult moment of their marriage, relief as an expression of love. The particular relief of someone who'd been lost finding north. Mar, he said. His voice broke a little on it. Hi, Deck. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment. When he pulled them away, he was mostly composed. I had no idea you were. How did you even get in here? Camera angles, she said. And people kept helping me. He laughed, and it was the right laugh, and she stood up from the folding chair and crossed to the cot and sat next to him, and he put his arm around her, and she let the weight of it settle over her like something she hadn't known she'd been holding up. They sat there for a minute, just that. It's in there, she said quietly. Yeah, he exhaled. It's not gone, it's just. He searched for the word listening. It's not in charge anymore. It's just listening. Do you want it gone entirely? He was quiet long enough that she turned her head to look at him. His jaw was set in the way it got when he was being honest about something he found uncomfortable. I'm not sure, he said. It's like having something very old and very far away suddenly understand what a song is, what a joke is, what it means to miss someone. He glanced at her sideways. Is that weird? Deck, you have an alien hitchhiker in your brain who didn't know what dog tags were. Fair. That's already weird. Yes or no doesn't make it weirder. He picked up the dog tags from where they'd been sitting beside the water pitcher and turned them over in his hands. She watched his fingers close around them. I want to choose, he said. That's the part I want. I want to be in charge of the choosing. She nodded. I told it that. He looked at her. What else did you tell it? I told it we'd give it access to everything, all the archives, all of it. In exchange for you. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, and it agreed. It's thinking about it, but yes, I think so. He looked at her, the way he'd looked at her in the park 9 years ago, under the tree when he'd shown her the NASA keychain and said 2 dreams and meant it. Like she was one of them. Like she always had been. How, he said, did you manage that? I asked it questions, she said, and I listened. and I didn't try to be anything other than what I am. He absorbed that for a moment. Also, I may have broken about 4 laws getting in here, she added. Mar. I prefer to think of it as unauthorized creative problem-solving. He laughed again, and this time it went all the way through him, and she felt it in the arm around her shoulders, felt the shape of him relaxing him back into himself. And she thought about the tomatoes they'd never planted, and the dreams he'd named, and the 90 seconds that had changed everything. And she thought that they had more in common with the thing in her husband's mind than it probably knew. We are here, not what we are, just that we are, we keep saying it. We can't seem to stop. They sat in the room until the bass began to wake up. She could hear it. Shift change, the distant movement of feet and equipment, the low mechanical sounds of a facility coming back online for the day. They had until someone checked the door. Here's what I think, she said. You always think something, he said affectionately. Here's what I think. It's not going to leave, not all the way, and maybe that's okay. And maybe, and I'm not saying this is settled, maybe it's useful. You already understood the signal theory. Now you've got a direct source. He looked at her sideways. Are you suggesting that we negotiate an ongoing arrangement? I'm suggesting that you two have a conversation about terms, with me present, because you are terrible at negotiating without me. He started to protest. The kayak, she said. He closed his mouth. The kayak rental negotiation of 2019, she said calmly. You paid full price in the rain. There were extenuating circumstances. There are always extenuating circumstances. That's why I negotiate. She stood up and offered him her hand. He took it. She pulled him to his feet and stood close enough that she could look at his face properly. All of it, in the early morning light coming through the high narrow window. He looked like himself. He looked like Declan, and like something else that was also real. She put her hand against the side of his face and he leaned into it. You okay? She asked. Getting there, he said. Good. Now give me back your grandfather's dog tags because I earned them. He laughed and unclipped them from where he'd rehung them around his neck, sometime in the last 3 hours, and dropped them into her palm. She closed her fingers around the warm metal, and she thought of an old man who'd survived Chosin, and what it meant to carry something forward, to keep transmitting. I was here, I was real, this mattered, all the way across generations, all the way to a white room, on a military base, all the way into the hands of a woman who'd gone in after her husband, because it was the only reasonable thing to do. The negotiations lasted 4 months. Mara sat in on every session. She brought notebooks. She brought coffee, because the conference rooms were cold, and humans did better when they weren't cold. And she'd decided that if she was going to help broker first contact between humanity and whatever the thing in Declan's head was, she was going to do it properly. She brought Parrish, who turned out to be an excellent technical translator once she was given official clearance to discuss the 90 seconds. She brought a signal theorist named Dr. Obed, who cried the first time the entity communicated directly through Declan's voice, and then apologized for crying, and then cried again, and didn't apologize the second time. The entity turned out to have a great deal to say. It had crossed 13 light years. It had been traveling for longer than Mara had a framework to imagine, through a galaxy that was mostly silent in the ways it expected silence, and loud in all the ways it hadn't. It had samples. That was the closest word it and Declan working together could produce. Impressions taken from 34 species, stored like pressed flowers in the architecture of whatever it was. The gathered testimony of non-human minds, not stolen. Never stolen. It was clear about this, though it understood now why some of its acquisitions had perhaps not been fully consensual in the way Mara had defined the term. It was learning. It kept saying that. It is learning. Humanity gave it the archives, all of them. 70 years of radio signal, and 3,000 years of written record, and the entire cataloged output of a species that could not stop talking about itself, even when there was no one to talk to. This had been Mara's offer, and it stood. In return, it agreed to terms. It would not enter any human without explicit and informed consent. It would identify itself. It would negotiate. These were requirements, not requests. Mara was very clear about that distinction. Requirements, it agreed. In exchange for the archives, it provided something else, what it had seen. 13 light years of observed data, the 34 species described, their technologies, their mistakes, their extinctions. And it had witnessed extinctions, several, the slow architectural collapse of civilization that had become so efficient they'd optimized out the thing that made them want to survive in the first place. It told them about a species 3 systems out, that had been watching Earth for 200 years without making contact, waiting to see if humanity would tear itself apart before they bothered introducing themselves. It told them the species was now reconsidering. Dr. Obed cried again. Parrish swore quietly and professionally for approximately 40 seconds. Mara wrote it all down. Declan asked it, at some point near the end of the 4th month, if it had a name. They were in the middle of a session, the conference room down to just the two of them, and Mara and Parrish, and it had been a long day, and Declan had been quiet for a while in the particular way that meant he was in conversation with the thing inside him, rather than the room. Then he looked up and asked. It was quiet for a moment, speaking through him. I had designations, it said. Signal markers, locational identifiers. Not names in the way you mean them. Pick one, Mara said. Something to call you. It'll make the paperwork easier. It considered this for what felt like a genuine moment of consideration rather than a processing pause. Signal, it said. If you want to name the thing I am, that would be the closest approximation. Signal, Mara repeated. Or the part of me that chose this particular species to approach, it added. Is the part that heard you for first. That could be the name. The part that heard you and couldn't stay away. The room was quiet for a moment. We'll call you Signal, Mara said. That works. Later, driving home with Declan in the passenger seat, the windows down in the spring evening, she reached over and found his hand in the dark beside her. He turned his palm up and held hers. The dog tags were in the glove compartment because she'd stopped wearing them around the time the negotiations moved into their 3rd month, and things started to feel less like crisis and more like work she recognized. You okay? She asked. Getting better at that, he said. She glanced at him. Being okay, he said. Signal keeps, it's trying to understand what okay feels like, as a state, what it's like to not be traveling, to have somewhere that is yours. He looked out the passenger window at the passing dark. It's never stayed anywhere before. She thought about that. About something that had been in motion for longer than she could imagine. Suddenly learning the weight of stillness. Suddenly, understanding that presence in a place was different from transit through it. We'll have to plant those tomatoes, she said. He laughed, quiet in the dark car, the evening air moving through both of them. Yeah, he said. We really should, she drove. The road was straight, and the night was clear, and somewhere very far away, apparently, a species that had been watching them for 200 years was reconsidering its position. Mara thought that'd probably be fine. Humanity had never had a problem with first contact in principle. They'd always been broadcasting. They'd always been reaching. They just hadn't expected anyone to reach back so soon. Certainly not like this. Quietly, through one man in a small room, through the weight of a set of dog tags, and the unplanted fact of 2 tomatoes, through 90 seconds of silence in which something ancient and vast finally understood that the signal was the point. Not the information, just I am here. And a woman who drove through the dark with her husband's hand in hers, who had broken 4 laws and taken 3 notebooks of notes, and negotiated first contact over cold coffee in a conference room, who had gone in after what was hers because it was the only reasonable thing to do. She thought that if the universe was listening, and apparently it was, then it had learned something important about this particular species. We do not stay where we are put, we go in after people. We bring notebooks and ask questions and sit across the table from whatever is looking back at us and say, nicely, clearly, without aggression or bluster. Tell me what you want, and I'll tell you what I need, and we'll work something out. And then we drive home in the dark, windows down, hand in hand, and talk about the tomatoes we're finally going to plant. Signal, riding quiet in the architecture of a man who smelled like soap and machine rooms, felt all of it, and for the first time in 13 light years, it stayed.